Good afternoon. This is a joint hearing of Senate Finance and House Ways and Means to hear updates on school budgets for the next fiscal year. And I believe this is our first time having Sean from the Agency of Education join us in testimony. Really glad to see you, Sean. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
And so would love to hear from you how budgets are coming in around the state.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Sean Kuzno, the interim CFO at the Agency of Education. And so I shared, I think, a little one-pager that was used in the past for these committee meetings. So we did two collections so far. One for the December 1 letter. You know, we collected the percent change that the budgets, the ed spending was doing versus the prior year. And then in January, we recollected that to get a sense of an updated figure to see how budgets were coming in. And that's what I'm showing in the table at the top. We've got the long-term weighted ADM on the left showing we have 105 budgets that submitted information in either the December 1 collection or the one we did in January. So it accounts for most of the long-term weighted ADM, and then we're estimating 17 budgets for the 11,449.
Sean, are you interested in sharing your screen, or would you like our committee assistant to share her screen?
That way anyone watching at home can see what we're talking about.
Sure. Let me set my screen up so we can do that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That is helpful.
Okay. Can you okay?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I was talking about these numbers over here, and then how that, for the 105 districts that submitted something, that accounts for 1.8 billion of the ed spending, and then we're estimating a small portion, 162 million. And going through the numbers, we've got 92% reporting for the weighted pupils, the long-term weighted pupils. Like I said, 105 districts submitted, either in the January 1 collection or the one we did in, December 1 collection or the one we did in January. For the 17 that didn't submit anything in either collections, we're estimating a 6.41 increase in ed spending for them. That makes an overall increase of 5.9% or 110.9 million in the ed spending line from FY25 to 26. And currently our ed spending line item, which includes the big ed spending grant and then the CTE not enrolled in the driver's ed allocation, we're looking at 1,992,471,049, and currently in our that line in our budget request is a bit higher, the 1,997,951. So in short, the budgets are coming in a little less than what we requested in our budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify the 17 budgets with the 6.41, that's an imputed number?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
It takes the average, and I bumped it up 1% as a little cushion.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Right back to you.
Okay. Let's see. So we really have, of the 105 districts reporting, only 9 of them have kind of the older data from December 1. And then we got 96 submissions in the January collection. And my final paragraph there, I think I already talked about that. The 6.41% increase is what we're estimating until we get their numbers. And it represents a small portion of the ed spending overall, just 8.2%. And looking ahead, so we are already collecting our more detailed preliminary budget collection, and our due date for that is in a couple days, February 15th. So anyone with a board approved budget should submit something by the 15th. And I think the next time we talk, I may be using some of that data for this projection. And I'm happy to take any questions. Or if you want other information in the future, happy to take notes on what you're looking for.
It sounds like the numbers are coming in about where the December 1st letter was. Is that the norm?
I think, yeah, I don't have a lot of history here. So I wouldn't be able to tell you. Julia may have a little more information.
Okay. There's just been some discussion. I know when we talked to one school board, they were coming in with a reduced budget, and 2 weeks later, they came in at 5.6. The governor has announced that he's going to buy that down, and just wondering about the impact of that. We met with another local school this morning, and they said that when we announce we're buying something down, then they don't know when they get a positive school vote, if it's positive because they approve of the 5.9% increase, or if they're approving it because they know they're not going to pay it. And I was just wondering if we normally how close we normally come in to the December 1st prediction. So if there's any, if you can see any history in that, just let us know.
Okay. No. I am hearing for the folks who submitted the prelim budget early, they are coming in line with these projections. So I think that's some good news. So they're keeping with what they were estimating in January, more or less. So,
Sean, how many districts and what type of districts are you seeing coming in over the excess spending threshold?
Yeah, I'd have to pull up a sheet here. I can get back to you on that if you'd like. So, who, what kind?
Okay, that maybe next time you come in 2 weeks, we could dive into that a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you.
We do have schools coming in up against that, though.
Yes. Yeah, I believe there are a fair number of them.
Does anyone on the committees have a?
It'd also be helpful to know if there's any commonality in the schools. Are they small rural schools? Are they big diverse schools? But is there any commonality in the schools that are coming up against the excess spending threshold?
Okay.
Representative Kimball?
I'm just wondering about the level of granularity. If you've got like a different level down where you can say for total personnel expenses 2026 compared to 2025 across all schools, do you have that kind of visibility? Because what I hear from different districts is they're reducing headcount while their other expenses are going up. I don't know if that's true though. I might be making that up.
Okay. Normally we wouldn't at this time, but we are collecting a more detailed preliminary budget. That's the one that's due February 15th. So we should be able to go down a level and compare personnel costs, at least in the general fund or ed fund.
To my local paper, there are 15 to 20 personnel being laid off in one of the local school districts. And they're still coming in, I believe, at the 5.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we can start to look at that after the 15th.
Thanks. Any other questions for Sean?
I have a comment, not a question.
I never know, what would be the prompt that would make that feel less
I
awkward?
don't have a comment.
Anyone have anything to add? Then it's a question.
Well, just to follow up on what Charlie just said, it will be interesting if we find that there are a lot of positions being cut, but budgets are still going up because of outside forces, how this new plan is addressing those outside forces. Thank you.
Is another term for outside forces cost drivers? Because, I mean, that seems like that's what's going on. There are cost drivers beyond personnel that are driving the budgets, probably first and foremost being healthcare rates, which need to be addressed if we're gonna actually try to save money on school budgets.
We're working on it.
And I mean, to add my own comment, healthcare rates and personnel costs are very closely tied
Yes.
to each other.
For sure,
right?
yes.
They were the same.
But if you're still cutting staff and your rates are, then it's
Yes.
even worse.
So that'll be fun, Sean, when you come back to compare sort of that second layer of granularity between a few years. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, we won't have position numbers, of course. We're just salary costs and benefits. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Any other? Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Okay, sounds good. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks.
Julia, would you like to join us?
Sure.
At this slightly awkward table configuration?
I've seen worse.
It's true.
She's closer than she used to, it's across the hall.
I really do feel like I'm in the middle.
And you now have the camera front and center, is what you
I guess so. For the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. There is an education fund outlook that I was asked to prepare for the committees for my testimony today. Would you like me to go ahead and share it?
Thank you.
So it should also be posted on the committee page under my name.
And make it a little bigger.
Okay. So, chairs, would you like me to dive into it or?
Let's start at the top and work our way down.
Okay, great. So this is the first time this year going through this, so sort of to level set. As you'll recall, for the December 1 letter, we had the Education Fund Outlook and then the Emergency Board, we had the Education Fund Outlook. So over the course of the session, as data and policy decisions start to come in or be contemplated, we being JFO, update our yield modeling and come to you with an update of the Education Fund Outlook reflecting the new data and the new policy considerations we were asked to include. So high level, before getting into all of the different columns, I want to name a couple of big picture what we're looking at here. So we have the Education Fund Outlook. This is really a reflection of the high level line items coming into the Education Fund, all of our revenues, as well as appropriations out of the Education Fund and uses. We also have the stabilization reserve included in this document and transfers to or from other reserves, surplus. So there's a lot in here. I have included at the top of the Outlook some letters, so it's easier to reference which columns we're referring to. So column A here, this should look very familiar to all of you. These are really the same lines that we've already looked at over the course of the session already and in previous years. Here in column B, we see fiscal year 25. This looks quite similar to the last Ed Fund Outlook I showed both of your committees for FY25. The only difference is that it's now been updated with the House-passed BAA. So what we're reflecting here is those changes in the BAA for FY25 that were passed in the House version. Moving forward, so this is really essentially, those are minor changes to appropriations, right? So nothing really significant changing there. Moving forward to column C, this is a reflection of the December 1 letter. These are the numbers that were included in the Education Fund Outlook for the December 1 letter. So when Sean was referencing the pieces that have since been updated, we're seeing this column C is what did it look like pre these updates, right? Pre the e-board revenue forecast update, pre this budget data collection. So we see the original projection of the education payment here in line 11. Column, I'm just gonna keep going. Okay, column D, this is reflecting data updates. So there's a lot that's been included in here, most of which Sean spoke to. So included here is that education payment update. So school budgets are coming in about $4 million lower than originally forecasted in the December 1 letter, as Sean mentioned, right? A small decrease. So that's where we're seeing that change in line 11. That's where the update has been captured. We also have included in the background of the modeling, you're not going to see much of it reflected here because this is high level, but I'll point in line F that the long-term weighted ADM has changed, and this is reflective of the final, for the December 1 letter, we didn't have the final long-term weighted average daily membership. So we've updated that in the background as well. The other piece that we've also included here is the statewide adjustment. So you'll recall last year in the yield bill, there was that statewide adjustment for the CLA. Also for the December 1 letter, the equalization study was not finalized and the statewide adjustment was not finalized. I had a very interesting conversation with a business official this morning, and so I decided for clarity purposes to include here, at least so that we can see that change, because we know that that's also playing into the yield. So that's really just to put everything in front of folks that may be helpful. So those are the updates that we have done, the underlying data updates that are done for the Ed Fund Outlook. Columns D and E then reflect one policy change or policy consideration in the modeling. Column D does not include any funds from the general fund for the purpose of buying down property tax rates. So just with the data updates and solving for uniform average bill change across all three classes, we know that's a policy choice, but I was asked to model a uniform bill change. So we see that that would be an average uniform bill change. If all of this data, which is still not final, were to hold true, we would estimate an average bill change of 5.8%. Of course, there are a number of policy decisions and data updates between now and when those decisions will be made. Moving forward to column E, the governor's recommended budget has that $77.2 million in general fund for the purpose of buying down property tax rates in 1 year. So this is modeling that $77.2 million general fund transfer. We can see that policy decision or exercise reflected here in line 8. You'll recall last year in fiscal year 25, $25 million was used to buy down property tax rates, one-time general fund. which we see here. And here we see that 77.2. So using that 77.2 one-time general fund dollars, and including all of the data updates, we see an average bill change, if it were to be solved uniformly, of 1.1%.
Julia, when you are you done with the full?
I'm as done as is helpful.
Nice.
When you're modeling the average percentage bill change, I think it's really hard for some reason to remember that's an average, and so there are bill changes that are way below and way above. How does the excess spending threshold feed into that?
Great question. So I actually, I'm not prepared to talk to the number of districts, or I'm not prepared to talk to the characteristics of the districts and the excess spending threshold, but there are 11 in this data update, 11 school districts that are reaching and exceeding the excess spending threshold. How does that fit into the average bill change? Well, we'll recall that the way that the excess spending threshold works is essentially if a school district's education spending per long-term weighted ADM falls above that threshold, the amount that's falling above that threshold is double taxed. So that's being included in the purpose of our calculation. We're looking at the school districts, we're looking at those that are falling above the excess spending threshold, calculating their tax rate with that double taxation. And then that's flowing through, of course, to the towns, the school district. So all of that to say, when we're calculating the average bill change, we are looking at the average growth in property across the different classes or income. And then we're looking at the average rate change. And the way that we're calculating those averages for the purpose of the rates is they're weighted averages based off of the parcels in the towns. So it is playing in.
And sort of skewing it upwards. Depending on the districts that are hitting the excess spending threshold, right? So if the 11 districts are really small districts with only a couple of properties in them, the impact of that excess spending threshold is not going to skew it upwards because it's not going to be a big part of that weighted average. If it were some of our largest districts, then of course it would skew it up. Yeah.
Two questions really quick. 11 out of how many? Is that out of the 119 school districts?
Yes.
Okay. And then can you help me understand line 32? What is the transfer to 10 million that we did to the unreserved unallocated, and why are we transferring from the now 40.8 million? What is happening in line 32? Allocation of revenue section.
Yeah, so what we're doing here is you can see that, and this is where, normally I have it up, I don't. I would add a plug to our, I'm gonna share my screen here for a second. On our JFO webpage, and I know you know this, and I'm saying this solely for folks watching at home. On our JFO webpage, we have the annotated guide of the Education Fund Outlook. So this is a helpful way of when thinking about interpreting the Education Fund Outlook and what is included in each one of the line items, it's reflected there. So the line numbers are not the same, but the lines themselves generally are. When talking about that line 32, is it?
Can you blow that up a little bit?
Yes. Is it sharing? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Okay, so when looking at the line 32, so transferring to or from unreserved unallocated. This is really, and the reason I was referencing the annotated guide, feel like kind of the trickiest part of interpreting the education fund outlook, because what it's doing here is it's showing us the different flow through to the different lines within the outlook. So we can see here that we have technically a revenue deficit, because when considering how much we're bringing in versus how much we're spending out, there's a difference about 38 million, but that's not actually a deficit because we have surplus dollars in the education fund, which we see here on line 39 from the prior year of 41 million. So we're taking that and then we're saying, okay, but we have a deficit, but we're using the unreserved unallocated.
Thank you.
So really, it's the 77 million up top and the 40 down below, 41 million down below to help subsidize.
Correct. Yeah, so the 77 million is on top of using the entire surplus for the purpose of uniformly lowering tax rates. That was assumed in the December 1 letter, because in statute, we have to assume that for the December 1st letter. Moving forward, that's a policy choice, but that's how I was asked to model it today.
And for the actual yield bill, we can change the relationship between the income-based yield and homestead yield if we want to. We can apply those unreserved something else. Do lots of things. Anyone? Yeah,
Sorry, I just got distracted. But if we use all of the reserves, $31 million in reserves, isn't there a requirement that we end the year with a certain amount of reserves? And would this not end the year with any reserves?
So I appreciate the question. So the 41 million that we're seeing here on line 39 is surplus. This is unreserved, it's unallocated.
Okay.
I think that what you're speaking to is the stabilization reserve, which you see
Yes.
here in lines 33 through 36.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the additional reserve section, I didn't see the stabilization reserve above it, okay.
So in statute, there's that reserve target of 5%. So what I've assumed here is that the stabilization reserve is fully funded.
Okay.
So this 52.1 million is sort of like 52.1 set aside, fenced drawn around it for the purpose of the stabilization reserve, or actually rather it's 54.9, 52.1 is the prior year. Set aside for the 5% of prior year net appropriations.
Okay, great.
And this last year, did we dip into the reserve? There was policy consideration last year to dip it into the stabilization reserve to buy down in 1 year. That policy decision was not made. So we did not need to refill it because it was not used to buy down rates artificially last year. Over the summer, in July, the revenue forecast came in lower than was anticipated, which meant that we had to model using the reserves over the summer for the purpose of ensuring the ed fund was fully funded.
I remember at one point we were needing to use the reserve, but things are looking better. At least we're not dipping into the reserves.
Correct, we're not dipping into the reserves.
That's better.
But on this topic, from my city council days, I fondly recall our reserve target was usually 3% of our operating budget, and we are at 5%. Has it always been a 5% education fund reserve?
I don't know. That's where I would want to phone a alleged council friend. I believe that in statute it says 3.5 to 5%, but the practice, at least since I started and the historical context I have is a 5% target, but I don't know what the history is there.
Thank you.
There's a really fun JFO presentation about like reserve targets and choosing the right reserve targets that recommend for people in their free time. Or maybe testimony committee. Anyone else? Okay.
There was one question that was asked to Sean that I made a note on. There was the question of how it compares to previous years, this change. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I did want to note that it really varies year to year. For instance, we saw last year between December and now we saw that uptick in education spending. So this is different than what we saw last year.
But last year was kind of an anomaly because they were under the impression in December that they were capped if they stayed under 10%. When that changed, numbers changed. So last year was an anomaly too. So I'm just wondering how. And then the budgets came out and then things came down. So, with the votes.
Starting to wonder how many years we can say that something is anomalous
I
before we
know.
realize it's anomalous when we are, right? Or I feel like we've been, because we change things every year.
Well, and we're in uncharted
We are in
territory right
uncharted
now,
territory.
so what we see up there today may not be up there tomorrow if things change elsewhere.
Can you remind us how much of spending on education in the state is federal funds?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's a significant amount of money coming to the state through federal education dollars. The percentage, I can certainly get back to you on that. I'm just not prepared to talk to that today.
Triple E.
Yeah, I think it's more than.
Oh, yeah.
A related question to what Chair Kornheiser just raised is, for the universal meals, I would be interested to know if that current rate is tied to any federal programs that are on the Trump chopping block. And so any information there might be regarding how that estimate could fluctuate with all the chaos that's coming out of DC would be welcome.
So I can't speak to what is or isn't on the federal administration's priority list. I'm not prepared to speak to that today.
We don't
I will say that just the fundamental underlying aspect of universal school meals, essentially the way that the program works is there's sort of 3 categories, so to speak, of families based on income. So at 130%, I believe, of the federal poverty limit level up to 180%. So your lowest income group are considered free. So there's federal reimbursement for those free meals. In that middle group, it's reduced, in which the feds kick in less, but a chunk, and the state, even pre-universal school meals, was making up that difference. And then the children from families above that level are considered paid, and the federal government kicks in a very little bit for those meals. The Universal Meals Program covers that difference between the family share, so to speak. So all of that to say, with a significant change in the amount of money coming from the federal government of those reimbursements for free, reduced, and or paid, that would create a larger gap that would need to be funded.
And I imagine that would be the very, very least of our problems, federal money running away for education. I'm curious, so the buy down here brought us to a uniform 1.1%. And I don't expect you to be prepared to speak to this today, but I'm curious about, like, to dive in the future, we're making all of these decisions based on an average, and that might mean that some district tax rates are going down significantly, and others are still going up significantly. And so in the future, when we have these conversations, I think it might be helpful to get a sense of the range and who is sort of, what kinds of districts are at the far ends of that range, and how sort of people are clustering towards the average. Because I think we make so many decisions based on that uniform average percentage bill range, and I don't know if that's necessarily the most appropriate way to be making those decisions.
Is anyone actually the average?
Okay.
But
Yes,
we
absolutely.
could have highs and lows, and essentially very few or no one in the middle once you average them out.
Well, they'll be wildly different just because of where they are in the appraisal. You're talking about rates.
Another one flying there.
We're gonna fix all of the appraisal challenges though.
Awesome. Everybody here is going to become an appraiser.
Anything else for Julia?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think we have a break of 30 minutes until Jake Feldman joins us. We are continuing our hearing here on February 11th, Tuesday, House Ways and Means and Senate Finance. And glad to be joined by Jake Feldman from the Department of Taxes to talk a little bit more about property tax deferrals and how that might work in some other localities. Come on in, thanks.
Great, thanks everybody. Jake Feldman, Tax Department. I guess my document is on Senate Finance page. And I also kind of want to walk you through the PowerPoint version. So I will try to do that. Okay, so we're talking about property tax deferrals and what other states do. Turns out they're pretty common, and we have been talking about them in the context of the tax department's proposal on property tax credits. And I have a link there if you want to go back and check out the testimony from last week. But we are proposing to change the income-based property tax credit system from an income-based credit to a homestead exemption tiered based on income. So it's quite a bit different. There's a few reasons for the proposal. The primary reason is to improve transparency. This will make it quite easy for school boards to tell taxpayers in different situations what they're going to pay in the coming year. And it will make it quite easy for voters, taxpayers, to know what their tax liabilities are going to be. Right now, it's very, very hard to impossible. Partly because of the lagged credit and partly for other reasons, but the lagged credit is the main reason. It also makes the education property tax more progressive with respect to property wealth. And the third reason is that the exemption will be sensitive to property taxes in the coming year, whereas the current credit is lagged a year, so it's based on what you paid in the prior year. So that means when property taxes go up a lot or your town reappraises, you're not getting the credit that's in line with whatever is happening in the coming year. So this addresses that. Households with high property value relative to their income would likely experience tax increases under the exemption. Deferrals are a type of relief commonly offered in other states to assist households who are in that situation. And if you remember from last week, my picket fence house, $400,000, it's worth $400,000, and the income of the people inside is about $50,000. And their taxes would go up by about $1,500, so they would double under the proposal. So we're looking primarily at ways to mitigate that kind of tax increase. The Lincoln Institute of Land, which is a nonpartisan land taxation organization, has an amazing database of how other states provide property tax relief. It's super easy to use. I linked it at the bottom of this page, but you can click on deferrals and 2023 and see what every state does. You could look at homestead exemptions, you could look at circuit breakers, but it's really quite an amazing resource. According to them, deferral programs are offered in 31 other states and also Washington, D.C. In just about every case, it's only people's principal residences that are eligible. There's something funny in Virginia where maybe other residences might be eligible, but it's really primarily for homeowners. The majority of the states limit eligibility to seniors, usually 65 plus, sometimes 62, sometimes 70, and or the disabled. Also, the majority of the states have income limits, maybe up to 100,000 in one case, but it's usually around 50,000 of income, and sometimes lower. Another common feature is that they require a minimum number of years in the home before eligibility, often 5 years. So it's trying, you'll get a sense through the presentation that this is really trying to help with age in place. If you put all the clues together, and so they're saying, these other states are saying usually 5 years you need to be a homestead, basically. Their version of homestead or homestead before you can become eligible for a deferral. They do all appear to charge interest, and most or all put a lien on the property. There's some where I couldn't quite tell. Vermont, you might know for current use, does put a lien on the property. That's around 19,000 parcels where we have a lien, an active lien. So it's not unprecedented in Vermont. And the taxes become due when the property is transferred to a new owner, or if you move out, like if you decide you're gonna, retire somewhere else and rent the house, the taxes become due, or the owner or the co-owner passes away. In a lot of cases, it looks like the owner can pass on, the deferral continues to the co-owner in case the owner passes away, which seems totally logical.
Are we saving questions or should I?
Why not?
On the income limits, is it like a hard cliff where in most of these where after 50 you can not defer anything, or is it like tiered where up to 50 you can do this much, 60, so?
It looked like harder cliffs to me, but that's a really good question. That's not, hard cliffs don't seem ideal. So Maine is a state that we often look to for tax ideas because of similar demographics and our New England friend. Maine's program is for people who are 65 and older, who are permanently disabled, as determined by state or federal agency. The income limit in Maine is under $80,000, and they also have a liquid asset test of $150,000 or $100,000 if the person is single. And according to them, and there's probably some devils in the details here, but liquid assets are anything that can be converted to cash in 3 months or less. This is actually, it's a state program, but apparently property owners apply to their municipalities at the very beginning of the year, and then the state reimburses the towns for deferred taxes. They have, like most states, they have localized property taxes. Vermont's got local for muni, state for ed.
Does Maine have a statewide property tax? Is it a local property tax that funds local education?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. so it's not a statewide. So the $100,000 or the 50,000 is closer to our super circuit breaker 47,
That's true.
which exists.
I should say, I didn't really mention it earlier, but, you know, to Senator Cummings' point, in most states, property taxes are local. So the deferral programs, they're kind of funny, like sometimes they're state programs where the state reimburses the town, or sometimes the state sets up the program and then the town or county has to offer it, and the state comes in with some support. So it varies in that way. And to be clear here, you know, we are talking about this in the context of Vermont's statewide education tax only. And we're not talking about anything regarding municipal taxes. It was set up in 2022, and apparently it costs about $1.5 million per year.
What does that $1.5 million do? Like, is it just administer it?
To fill in the property taxes that people have elected to defer.
So the state was gonna borrow some money.
And then where does the deferred, once the deferral period is over, where does the money go?
Where does it go? It goes back to the state in some form. And I'm not sure which state fund it goes to.
Okay.
But it's a young program in Maine. We're gonna talk about Oregon in a second, which is an old program, which I was surprised to find out about.
How many people, percentage, is this a program that a lot of people sign up for? Or is this something that few people, or somewhere in the middle?
In Maine, I think it was in the under 10,000 households that signed up for it.
Jake, doesn't that, $1.5 million, that has to be administrative costs rather than the cost of the program. You've got 100,000 people with deferred income.
It's under 10,000 households deferring property taxes. So is that $1,500 each?
I have the impression that it's not the entire property tax amount. In some of these cases, it's just lowering their property tax, leveling it off, so maybe like $2,000 out of an $8,000 property tax bill. Is that incorrect?
That's correct. You know, in a lot of cases, I think you can elect how much you defer. You don't have to defer the entirety of your property taxes.
And who sets the interest rate?
Pardon?
Who sets the interest rate?
The state's, you know, laws set the interest rates. They vary. Some are locked at like between 4% and 6%. Some are connected to other inflationary indexes or interest rates that are coming from somewhere else.
So I do this when I'm 65 and I live to be 105 and I've deferred more than the value of my property. What happens?
Yeah, there are limitations. States, you know, I would encourage you to check out the table because there's a lot of variety, but states do try to make sure that people do not defer more than their properties are worth through various mechanisms.
So with this, Maine must have a way to do an asset verification.
Apparently for liquid assets, which are a little bit easier to verify than properties.
Yeah, because I think we had a report done last summer, right, in terms of looking at somebody's net assets to determine whether or not they're eligible for a property tax credit. And
Yeah.
I think the recommendation was don't do that because we have no way of verifying the assets.
Yes, that was me this summer.
Just making sure I was on the same page.
It's in fact linked in his report.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, no, liquid assets are probably a little easier to verify. You need a point in time, but then things that are harder to verify are like, you know, yachts, baseball cards, stuff like that.
Yeah, yachts would be tough.
Senator Beck, I'm sorry, your title.
Yeah, just a couple of Maine specific questions before you move on, Jake. In Maine, can you defer 100% of your tax bill, or are you restricted to only a certain portion of it?
I'm not totally sure. Okay.
And the second question is, do you know what is Maine's homestead exemption?
Yeah.
What's their homestead exemption? Is it?
Yeah, I think it's a set amount, as I remember. It's a set amount and it's small. That's their homestead exemption. Like if you're a homestead, you can reduce the value of your property by whatever it is. And they also have a property tax fairness credit, which is like a circuit breaker. So they have three things working in tandem to.
Oh, it sounds so complicated.
Not like ours, not like a housing market like in Maine. Because low-income people living in high-value homes, we've said this isn't good, you should move out or we're gonna tax you more under the system. Does Maine have housing, you know, is that, it begs the question, is that a choice? Do I have that littler home where I make money if I move there? Does Maine have, what's their housing market like? Because Vermont has no surplus right now. So moving is frequently not a choice unless you want to move to the Northeast Kingdom from Chittenden County, which.
We don't have any housing either.
You don't have any housing either.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, the thing that's similar about Maine to us is definitely the demographics.
Yeah.
And definitely second home ownership, you know, coming from Boston. So those things are similar, but I'm not sure if there's more like, you know, smaller houses available.
I have picked up the Realtor magazines when I'm there, and I haven't seen any cheap housing, not in Southern.
Yeah, thank you. How is that deferral amount considered and the lien on the property? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that through a transaction, transfer, whether it's to a family member or somebody else, that amount is there as a lien? Who's responsible for that? Is it the state? Is it the individual? Is it?
I think it varies. I think in what I saw, in a lot of cases it was the state, and in a lot of cases it was the county, because you know county taxes are popular in other states, and then in some cases it might have been the municipality. But in this context, I think it would be Vermont, state of Vermont.
Okay.
And like I mentioned before, we do have around 19,000 liens out for current use properties.
Thank you.
And I imagine if we go deeper on this, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about liens.
Thinking about what?
Liens.
The banker's representative is back there watching us.
He's just watching Jake, he's not.
Liens gets their attention.
I think you have other states to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So Maine is a fun one, useful. Minnesota is the ITAP, Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy's most progressive state in the country. They have a deferral program. It's for people 65 and older, and if they're married, the spouse must also be at least 62. Their income limit is a little higher, 96,000. Similar, the household has to have been a homestead for the past 5 years. And this is interesting, kind of like us, only the taxes on the house and the surrounding 1 acre are eligible for a deferral. So we base our credit system on the house site, which is the house and surrounding 2 acres. And the exemption proposal is for just a house site too. So I guess a question would be, could people defer other homestead taxes if they have acres beyond 2 acres? But in Minnesota, the deferral is only for the house site, basically.
How long has this program been in effect?
That might be at the bottom of the slide.
I don't see it.
Oh, not.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It gives the link though to the site.
Yeah. It does not allow reverse mortgages, life estates, or for there to be other state or federal liens on the same property.
So that would hit current use.
If Vermont went the same route and decided there couldn't be two liens, it would, I guess, intersect with current use, but maybe, I don't know, it's a policy.
The house
Maybe we
site's
could just
not-
decide.
house site's
not current use.
The
Yeah,
house site
the
is
house
not.
site isn't, but if I had a lien I own, my mortgage is on a house of 20 acres. I bought it 10 years ago. I've still got years to go on my mortgage. I'm 65. I'm deferring my taxes on my house. I can see where you could get into a situation where liens might be worth more. You could have liens more than the value if I live to be 85, which isn't rare these days.
Yeah, so the states, they have, and this is where it gets complicated, they do have, ways to try to keep people from deferring too much. And so that's a consideration. I'm gonna show you later on that the way I'm thinking about the deferral is as a tax mitigation strategy for the homestead exemption, like to try to help those red cells. I don't know if you remember from last week, but the people who were harmed. So in that case, like you might want to defer like up to a certain amount, which I think could be around $2,000 at the maximum, but and that would mitigate the tax increases. But beyond that, it would kind of stay the same as it is now. So it wouldn't be an unlimited deferral. It would be a tool to try to fill in on the homestead
And this
exemption.
would be only the state taxes, not the city of Montpelier taxes.
Right. Yeah, we left that part of the circuit breaker as it is.
Representative Canfield, did you?
Well, it's just, people have a reverse mortgage now that continues with no new ones.
Pardon? The reverse mortgage
If
continues?
somebody's got one already,
Uh-huh.
this goes into effect, what happens to that reverse mortgage? It just stays. And no new ones are allowed.
Yeah, I don't think you could do a new one. I think reverse mortgages mostly do not like deferrals because in a reverse mortgage, the bank is basically slowly buying back your house. So they don't want to have a tax due when they get the house, and they don't want the lien probably. Yeah, so Senator Brock brought that up last week, and it appears to be pretty accurate that deferrals and reverse mortgages are incompatible.
And so someone would just not be eligible for this, for the deferral program?
Right, if you have a reverse mortgage.
In theory, you use the reverse mortgage to pay your property taxes, in theory.
That's how what reverse mortgages are supposed to do, among other things. In Minnesota, it's actually kind of based on your prior year income, and then beyond that, you can defer, and the state reimburses towns. And this gets to what we've been talking about. You can only defer 75% of the estimated market value of the property minus the balance of any loans at the time of application. So there's a limit on it to make sure you're not underwater.
I remember Minnesota was the one state other than Vermont that didn't do a foundation formula of some form. So does Wisconsin, okay. So does Minnesota then pay for its education with its property tax? Or is it a straight thing?
I think every state, maybe except Hawaii, has property taxes to pay for education. And foundation formulas are sometimes, paid with general fund money, which can include any, source.
Just a quick follow-up too. Do you actually mean maximum that can be deferred is 75% of the estimated market value of the property?
I think that's my understanding, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it seems like a lot, so like if the property was worth 475 of that would be $300,000, so that's seems like a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Minus the mortgage though.
If there is.
There is one.
Is that deferred plus interest? Because if you're deferring up to 75% and you're paying 5% interest, that could get you over the market value of the property.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We need to be careful that wording. If we do it.
Have you seen states just say, we recommend that you look into getting a reverse mortgage for help paying your property taxes?
Tax collectors might, I know some of the better ones counsel people on this cheaper ways to borrow. Some of your local tax collectors might, I know I've had one that would counsel people that there are cheaper ways than just not paying your property tax until your Social Security check comes in to get the money, like go get a short-term loan, there are other.
I can say that, as a tax, I guess I'm a tax administrator is what, maybe you'd call me. But we're careful about what we put on the website. Like we don't really give people tax advice. So, it gets risky. We even don't really talk about federal taxes all that much. We kind of try to keep it.
Another question about demographics. Can you point out what Minnesota's demographics are like? Maine's are similar to ours, but I'm wondering what kind of thing we're doing to the market if we were to make it for certain ages that we already have a lot of, and how much that cost would be to us, and how the rest of the state has to make up for it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure of Minnesota's demographics. I know that in Vermont's property tax credit system, seniors are a little bit under half of the recipients, but they're getting more than half of the benefit. So, if we limited it to seniors, that would be half of the credit population. And yeah, it would cost something. And who would pay for that and where would the money come from? I will also say that deferral programs, because of these elements that we've been talking about, are not super popular. There's the lien, not popular, interest, not popular. The other thing that's not I was talking about with the commissioner is that, I think when you offer something like a deferral, you're really getting to the core population of people who need the assistance. There may be people whose income is ostensibly low, but they actually are able to pay their property taxes, and that's another reason why these programs don't appear to cost that much in other states. Costs Minnesota around $2 million per year, as far as I could tell.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? In terms of the cost, are you factoring in just the deferred amount of taxes owed, or are you factoring in the interest earned and the administrative costs?
So I was not factoring in the administrative costs. I think Minnesota's was also a pretty young program. So at the beginning of a program, it's gonna cost money, but then at some point, the state will recoup down the road.
Plus interest.
Plus interest, yeah. And so that's why I picked out Oregon's to talk about.
Wait, that, you didn't answer my question.
Oh, sorry.
So
It's-
it does not include the interest or the administrative costs, it's just including the deferral amount?
Right, well, the interest would be money paid to the state.
Right,
So
right, that's what I mean.
It's just the amount the state pays. But I think Minnesota's program is pretty recent, so I don't think they're getting much money back. I think the $2 million might be a net number, but I think it's mostly state obligation at this point.
It would be helpful to find out if these numbers are net or gross. And the cost that you all think it would cost to administer something like this at tax.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is a very awkwardly shaped table.
People that are in blind spots.
Sorry.
Jake, I expect you not to be able to speak to this, but I'd be curious how our current tax foreclosure policy or process currently looks. Do we in Vermont foreclose on a lot of properties when they don't pay their taxes? And is that usually just held by the local municipality? Would this in any way be a softer approach to give people options to continue ownership of their home before the state comes in to possess the property?
There's a report about that a working group that we put in statute finished, and the House Committee on Ways and Means is hearing about it tomorrow.
In the morning, the afternoon.
I don't know, but I'll look at my agenda.
Good morning.
It's at 10:30 in the morning. Chris Delia will be there too. He's gonna spend the whole week with us.
We'll have to do that one too if we go down the road.
And that was part of H480? What is the bill? Was that 480, the appraisal bill?
Yes,
Yes? Okay.
that was the bill that.
Cool.
Okay, so Oregon, the applicants must be 62 and over, or disabled, or receive federal Social Security disability benefits. The income limit is 60,000 in Oregon. And they also have a net worth test that it must be less than $500,000, and it excludes the home and personal property, baseball cards, yachts, paintings. So it's probably getting more at liquid assets.
Wait, so they have an asset test there? They have to figure out how much the yacht costs.
The baseball.
That's right.
Well, I think that would be
And
excluded.
it's personal property.
That's excluded, but baseball cards aren't?
No, the baseball cards excluded, yachts excluded, paintings excluded.
Oh, so what's the net worth? What is,
It must
what's
be
included in
more
this?
liquid assets.
Oh, just like stocks and bonds and that kind of thing?
Your retirement account?
Let's all take turns because there are 4 people talking at once. And you're
Yeah, is that liquid asset your retirement savings?
I'm not sure.
I would assume that if I've been saving and I'm living on my savings and Social Security, that those savings are a liquid asset, unless they're tied up in a CD, but if they're just in a high yield savings account or just a plain old savings account. So I would have to go through, I'd have to live on my $3,000, $2,000 a month. Okay.
Yeah, and it looks like another cliff, which is not ideal. Like somebody who's 499 is fine and 501 is not, that's not ideal. But I'm when you get into these things on the websites, the details can get complicated.
I think it was by a baseball card.
Pardon?
If you had to get under 500, just buy a baseball card.
Buy a baseball card because you're negative.
Representative, what did you still have to say?
No.
This part of Oregon's program was really interesting. That the value of your house can't exceed certain limits, and that they're different county to county, and they also are different based on how long you've lived in the house. So if you've lived there longer, the value goes up. So that's another type of net worth test in a way, and reading about it, it sounded like at the beginning of the program, they were giving a lot of money to people in very valuable homes. There's a political, pushback on that, and they put in these limits on the property value.
That would be interesting to get some details.
And then link to the Oregon program is right down at the bottom. In this case, the state and the local government share the tax loss. I think it's mostly state, but it's a shared loss. So it's very old. It was created in 1963, which might predate California's Proposition 13, possibly. And it around 2000, it actually started to become a net positive for the state's general fund because people were paying back. So some considerations that I've thought of for a possible Vermont deferral program is, would it be limited to only seniors? Our current income sensitivity has no age, anything in it, for the most part. So would this be sort of like a really targeted kind of age in place policy, or would it be more widespread? And I think that participants should be able to elect to defer up to some amount, and I mean, maybe this is just too obvious to even say, so it's like, if they elect to defer up to $2,000, but their education tax liability is only $1,700, then you'd only want to defer $1,700. Maybe that's so obvious I shouldn't even put it on there. But
Nope, we don't want to accidentally create a situation where we're refunding
right.
taxes based on something that we did by accident. Do you have recommendations on what the up to might be?
Yes, coming up.
Cool. Some bullets, thank you.
So again, we talked about deferrals as one possible policy tool to help with the homestead exemption and the people whose taxes would go up. So it could be intentionally configured to complement the homestead exemption and strategically mitigate tax increases. Like, we know what those are going to be roughly. So it could look something like, for that two lowest parts of the circuit breaker, maybe that group could defer up to $2,000. And then for the next circuit breaker group, like, it really only goes up to 47,000, but I called it 50,000. Maybe they could defer 1,500. And then 50 to 75 could be 1,000, and then the next group could be 500. But I'm just sort of like throwing that out there because when you look at the table from last week where we looked at how many households there are in different combinations of income and property and what might happen in the deferral, you can kind of see that the people in the bottom table, there's a bunch of red, which is bad, and income between 0 and 25, if their houses are worth over 400,000, their average tax change preliminary based on tax department modeling could be in that 1,900 or 1,600 realm.
That's what they could defer?
So maybe you would offer a deferral of $2,000 for that group.
Jake, I think I missed that under this proposal, not the deferral proposal, but the shift to the credit, is that what you're calling it? Include removing the circuit breaker.
Include removing the circuit breaker?
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily.
Okay.
We have legislative language though. Does that legislative language include removing the circuit breaker?
It preserves the municipal part of the circuit breaker.
But not the education one? Okay,
Right.
thank you.
So the education one could be brought back on. What would happen is, you'd have to make a decision. Do you apply it to the property tax bill? Or do you do it as an income tax refund, which is what a lot of states do? If you put it on the property tax bill, then you're back to a situation where people have a lagged credit, and you're back to a situation where some people don't pay for education because their taxes are locked. So it's not ideal, but it could be brought back.
Thank you. And I think I do remember you bringing that up before, so I'm sorry.
The numbers in red, is that how much your property tax would go up? Is that $400 if you're 47 to 90 and you live in a $300,000 to $400,000 house?
Let's see, 47 to 90, 300, that's right, an average tax increase of $400 for that group.
But if you're 0 to 10,000, you'd go, so people that are least able to pay would see their taxes go up $1,700 or $1,400?
Yeah, it's hard to fit for the circuit breaker population. In the circuit breaker population, the income percent for 0 to 10,000 is 0.05%. Am I getting that right? It's 0.5%. So if their income is $5,000, then they owe $25, even if their house is worth $400,000. So I'll show this in Ways and Means on Thursday, but it's difficult to fit for the circuit breaker population just because of the math. So yes, we're thinking about ways to help that group.
That's the afternoon.
What we don't have, I think you have the numbers, Jane, somewhere by it. It would be nice if this graph, I've seen it before, if it also had like in parentheses, like how many Vermonters actually fall into this category.
Oh, so that's the top. So like Senator Cummings was asking about
Oh, okay, got it.
0 to 10.
Yeah.
And she's looking at that.
300 to 400K. Yeah.
Yep. So there's a couple hundred households who are in that group.
100.
100 over 400 and 100 300 to 400. Yep.
So,
okay.
So
yeah,
we're not talking about huge quantities of
right. The bulk of Vermonters, you start to really see the core of income sensitivity starting around 25,000, and then up to the top. So yeah, there's fewer households up there. I think in some cases, like it's more one-time events that lead to the low income.
Right.
But yeah, the top is the counts, bottom is the average impact on preliminary tax department modeling.
Our property tax credit, as it currently exists, does not have any age minimum, right? Anybody that qualifies, so if you look at retirees at 62 or 65 to qualify. Has that ever come up in previous discussions for consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have asked in the past, should it? And then I know there's one part of household income that tries to kind of separate seniors from everyone else. It double counts interest and dividends if you're under 65 and your interest and dividends are over 10,000. So it's like trying to get at like sort of independently wealthy younger households. But if you're over 65, it doesn't do that. So that's the only tie-in with age in the current credit system.
I think there's a real balance between folks who are still paying a mortgage, and that makes it harder for them to pay their property taxes, and then folks who are not paying their mortgage anymore but might have a lot less income. I think that's a hard balance to make policy-wise. As someone in the former, not the latter category, I have my advice.
Yes, those are the two most vulnerable ends. If you're paying 50% of your income, and I mean, property tax increases I was getting emails about were thousands of dollars last year. And if your mortgage to the hill or your social security didn't go up a couple thousand, and here in Montpelier, 8, 10, 11,000 is not an unheard of or rare
That's what I pay.
property tax. Yeah,
Here in Montpelier.
yeah. So that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think I have maybe one or two more slides. I have this. That is just some questions that the two committees had for me last week. Senator Brock brought up reverse mortgages. They generally not compatible with deferrals. So his instinct was correct there. We started talking about trusts and life estates, and I started talking to some staff at the tax department, quite complicated stuff. I'll tell you, I'll offer what I know, but if you want to get deep into trusts and estate planning, you might want to talk to somebody else from tax or a lawyer. I found out that in Vermont, property in a trust cannot be a homestead, except there are some certain situations where it can be. And I wanted, and which are pretty clearly laid out in that section of statute that I referenced. And I want to say that we haven't proposed any changes to these rules. So you're asking, does this affect trusts or life estates? It would be the same as now. If they're eligible now for a property tax credit and to be a homestead, they would continue to be eligible to be a homestead, and they would be eligible for an exemption. So we're not proposing any changes around ownership.
Right.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
I don't think I understand that. I mean, you said, first of all, you started that section of your testimony by saying they're generally not eligible except for when they are. And then we have a total of $14.8 million in credits to them.
So the trusts are specific situations where they are eligible, and according to our data, the current fiscal year, there were 3,070, so it might not be that isolated of a situation, and they received education credits totaling $6.2 million in FY25.
That's a revocable trust.
Right.
We can get more testimony
Yeah.
from people who know more about life estates and trusts than Jake, who started his testimony saying he didn't know very much
That
about
may be
this.
our next joint meeting.
That sounds like fun. This is a lot of money.
Can you remind me how many properties there are?
There's roughly 170,000 homesteads,
Okay.
and in FY25, I think 105,000 got credits.
Okay, thank you.
Here's the data number.
I got that.
So most people.
So these trusts and life estates that did get credits were considered homesteads.
Yes, life estates are a little bit different. Don't really ask me much about it, but it's another estate planning tool. You live in the house or something, and then you've already
That your
designated.
children own, or whoever you left it to, frequently your children own it. But you can sell it, burn it down, you can do whatever you want to it, but
Unless it's
ownership
insurance
has
fraud.
yeah, that is insurance fraud. But it has passed to your children, and we had an issue last year, it turned out, we found out from your attorney, there is a whole section dealing with when the property transfer tax was due, because frequently this was a specific incident where the person that was being left the property, and it was a small ranch house kind of thing, didn't have the money to pay the property transfer tax. So that, we took a fair amount of testimony and decided to do nothing. So I don't think you got it.
We did
pass expansions and shift changes to life estates and trusts in the last biennium.
I think we allowed life estates.
Okay, so we will learn more about that.
Yes.
Thank you, Jake.
So
You know,
if, so that's like, you know, that's like a little bit under 5% of all the credit recipients are life estates. And they received $8.6 million. Life estates definitely can be homesteads, and it says on our instructions, life estates should declare their homestead. So different estate planning tools there. And then there's a question from Senator Chittenden about tax capital gains. And gains from the sale of a primary residence are not taxable at the federal level or in Vermont if they are less than $500,000 if you're married, filing joint, or $250,000 if you're single. And when you go to calculate your gain on the sale of your home, you can subtract out the value of improvements that you've made to it. So, you know, that would be, I don't know, I guess in Vermont you could, if you stayed in a house and maybe it appreciated a lot, you could exceed those levels, but you know, that would cover probably most houses, I would think. Gains over that amount are taxable, and they're not eligible for the capital gains exclusion in Vermont. So we're not, you know, we are taxing them to the extent that they occur. So that's that.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything for Jake? Yeah.
we will learn more about estate
So
planning.
this is the governor's proposal for the deferral program, right?
We are proposing a homestead exemption, and
I'm just speaking about specifically the deferral program.
yeah, I mean, I don't think I've really outlined any hard parameters here on the deferral program. It's definitely an option. And, you know, if we would look into it more, for sure. I think the administration is open to it as a way to mitigate some of these tax increases.
Yeah, I'll save my comments for why I hate this program so much. In terms of taxing people beyond their ability to pay and taking away from their heirs. But besides that, so it is an actual serious idea, is what you're putting in.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank you so much, Jake. Oh, sorry. I'm really blind spot right there. Yeah.
I have a similar comment to Representative Kimball. So I'm concerned that with the proposal of that grid, that what we're proposing to do is to tax people with very low incomes but very valuable houses, effectively taxing them out of their homes and offering this deferral program. That I would just need to normalize that and know that other states have taken a similar approach. But those are my hesitations, because I feel like we are putting more tax burden on those making lower incomes and giving a tax relief to those with higher incomes.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be helpful to cover something that I haven't really covered, and that is how unique what Vermont does now is. It's extraordinarily unique, and other states have reached very different conclusions on how to tax property. You know, if you are a low-income person in a high-value home, where you want to be is Vermont. There's no state where it's giving you $8,000 off your property taxes based on your income. So it's an extraordinary outlier. So as I mentioned a few times in the report, you know, this would make our system of property tax relief much more similar to what other states do. We would have to kind of fine tune it to try to mitigate tax increases and to try to mirror what we do now. But it would be a format that other states do for property tax relief.
And in committee on Thursday, when you come back, is that Thursday?
To your committee, yeah.
Whatever I said. Yep. We're gonna see what happens when we move the brackets around a little bit. So sort of using the construct that taxes brought forward, but trying to shift some of the tax responsibility around a little bit more to see if we can move the greens and the reds.
I'm interested, just as a tag on, in your modeling, did you try to make this revenue neutral so that you're basically, okay. Because then I'd be curious, maybe if we look at a way to, if we adopt this, if it's not necessarily revenue neutral, but it starts to reduce what we have been giving away in the property tax credit, that might be a more sensible policy direction, but I still would need to reconcile what this fundamentally would do, which would be raising taxes on those with lower incomes with very valuable houses.
And, yeah, the other question is housing availability. It's one thing to let the state pay your taxes when I'm just choosing to stay in my 6-bedroom mansion. It's another thing when Vermont has also been unique in the difficulty we've made it to build moderately priced housing.
I don't think we're unique in making it built, but we do have an
We are.
unbelievable housing scarcity
We
here.
do,
Yes.
and so it's not always a choice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I could say about it, and it's late in the afternoon, so I'd probably get myself in a ton of trouble.
Yeah, we're listening.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, yeah, I did say more in the report, but you know, property value is wealth. There's no argument from anyone on that, and that is why states tax it the way they do. And in Vermont, we tax it as wealth in 2 cases. Estate tax, it's wealth, and I'll let you in on tax department secret, since we're all here. Tax department secret is this. Vermont has one wealth tax, the estate tax and the property tax is another one, but the estate tax is paid by about 100 people a year, and they tend to be really low income. They tend to have.
Except for the month of January,
What's in January?
it was like wildly high.
That's different. So the
Yes.
state did receive a lot of estate tax revenue that year. But what I'm saying is these people who pay the estate tax, they're modest income in the years before they die. So should we income sensitize the estate tax? Most people would say no. It's an estate tax. It's a tax on wealth. Recently, there's been a couple proposals on the property transfer tax. Well, maybe we should tax people buying properties worth more than $1 million more. Well, that's, in that context, you look at the value of the property and you say, I should tax it based on the value of the property. So when a person is living there, it's still property, it's still wealth, and that's how it's recognized in every other state. So somebody who has no mortgage but lives in a very valuable home is in a really good position. And I don't know.
Senator. Yeah, thank you, Jake. I think that's a really important point that you just made, and I understand the discomfort that I'm hearing from people, but generally speaking, the biggest asset that most people have is their home, and that's where their wealth is. And if you look at this table of the number of people who are low income with a very expensive home or a relatively expensive home, it's only a couple hundred people. The bulk of the people are down in the lower part of the graph. So I think that there was lots of conversation in this building about wealth taxes last year, and this is as you said, does get to that in a different way. And obviously we need to tweak it to like calibrate it in the right way if we're gonna do this, but having a really expensive house is a big asset to have.
In that tax secret you just shared on YouTube, do you have reason to believe that of the 100 individuals that paid, that the estate tax was collected, that they were receiving the property tax credit in our system as it currently is?
We didn't look at that. The question was, we were talking about the estate tax thresholds several years ago, and they were raised from maybe 2.75 to 5 or something like that. But we were just curious about, like, are they also really high income people? And it turned out that they're not, like in the years preceding their death. So that was the takeaway.
Which, great, I'm just gonna pitch random reports while I sit here today, but there was, JFO did a really great report, Joyce Manchester is sort of one of her, I think the last project she did before she retired from JFO was a report on the correlation of income and wealth in Vermont. That's a fun read. Thank you so much, Jake, really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And all your effort on this, and see you very soon.
Yes, and I'll tweak, I'm gonna have some ideas,
Thanks.
tweak some things.
And before we wrap, Chris Delia is going to join us to share some of his banking thoughts on all of this.
I have to go upstairs, so I will watch them.
Come on, I sat through yours. Chris Delia, President of Vermont Bankers Association. Senator Chittenden, the issue of property tax sales, municipal tax sales, there is a report that's out there. I think one of the interesting things that we discussed last year with your committee, Senator Hardy, was the fact that there's a lot of folks out there that are eligible that don't know the program exists or can't navigate through the program. And our thought was if we could direct some more of those people to it, it would eliminate a fair amount of tax sales that may happen in the future. You also made changes to the municipal tax sale last year. It's now a year from the time that they're delinquent before you can start to initiate a sale. You have to offer a repayment plan or option. So there's a lot of things that are in the works to deal with municipal tax sales. Reverse mortgages. Senator Cummings may remember Tom Candon. This was a big issue for him years ago. And we put in statute that if you're going to offer reverse mortgages, you have to comply with the federal guidelines for that program. And that basically eliminated, I think, all but one reverse mortgage player in the market. The reality is, Chris Delia owns a home. I'm struggling to afford my home. I don't have a mortgage on it right now, but it's of $300,000 value. I can go get a reverse mortgage, I can live off of that money, and when the property is sold, it's going to get repaid. There may or may not be any equity left for my heirs, if you will. Trying to think of what else. Eric Fitzpatrick on trusts, but I would also contact Bob Paolini because I think they have a whole trust committee or division that you could learn quite a bit from. On current use, you made changes to the current use statutes not to...
Sorry, just 1 second. Is that who joined us last year? Remember, to talk about trust?
Mark Langen.
Mark Langen. Okay.
Joined you last year, yep. You also have a trust bill that's currently in your Judiciary Committee that they're looking at. It doesn't do a lot as far as upending, current policies, but there is a bill that's currently being looked at. Current use, we made some changes to the current use program a few years ago that created a conditional lien on the property. Because we were finding that as soon as you enrolled the property in current use, the state automatically put a lien in the land records, and that was problematic for the property owners if you were going to remortgage your property or get another loan on the property for whatever reason. So the conditional lien is a notification to lien holders that says the state's hanging out there, and if you ever take the property out of current use, the state's going to swoop in and exercise their right on the lien. All of that.
So it can't move ahead of an existing, it can't move ahead of somebody.
It can't move ahead of somebody until they pull it out of current use. What do we think about this? And I'll be very brief. The challenge is when you're creating, first of all, I agree, can we reduce property taxes so that people can afford it and we don't have to come up with programs that help them do things like this? What we see as problematic, and I kind of laugh at how these other states did it, is you're eroding for the lending industry the value of that first mortgage position. We already have property taxes in front of it. This has the potential of creating another priority treated like property taxes. That is an absolute unknown number.
if I'm deferring $5,000 a year or $2,500 a year, and I'm in my home for another 20 years, that's 40 plus grand that's sitting in front of the mortgage. What does that do for your equity in the property? If for some reason I need to pull that equity out, sell the property, and all of a sudden I realize I don't have anything there that I may have used to go into something else. Or that's money that's sitting in front of the first mortgage. And it's not just this concept. It's a concept of how do we deal with nuisance properties that some of your committees will look at, that want to put a penalty on the property owner. That would take a first mortgage position. I heard of one figure, $800 a day. If I don't deal with it in 10 days or 20 days or whatever the number is, all of a sudden, I'm looking at a very high number in front of the mortgage. And there's other concepts as well that might jump in front of it. So selfishly, yeah, we don't like it. That said, devil's always in the details. How do you structure a program that, if this is the road you want to go down, that can work for all of the interested parties involved, whether it's a conditional lien, whether it's a secondary position, whatever it may be. But that's where we would come from it initially, and that's why I was sitting here today just listening. As always, happy to work with you to try and find solutions. So,
Thanks for joining us.
yeah, happy to.
The House Ways and Means Committee is done for the day.
We are too.
Okay, and Ways and Means, we are in our committee room tomorrow morning at 9.